I was helping a customer when my husband texted, "I'm leaving you. I emptied our account. Have fun." I never thought I'd be that woman. The one whose husband vanishes with their life savings while she's working a double shift. But there I was, standing behind the counter at the department store where I'd worked for 8 years, staring at my phone in disbelief. James had blocked me everywhere, taken our joint savings of $42,000, and disappeared. What he didn't know was that I'd been preparing for this day longer than he realized. This isn't just a story about betrayal. It's about what happens when someone underestimates the wrong woman. When life shatters, it often happens on perfectly ordinary days. There I was, helping Mrs. Peterson find the perfect anniversary gift for her husband of 30 years, when my phone buzzed. "I'm leaving you. I emptied our account. Have fun." Just 12 words that destroyed the life I thought I had. My hands trembled as I excused myself, rushing to the break room where I could catch my breath. 8 years of marriage, gone in a text message that took less than 10 seconds to read. I tried calling him back immediately, but it went straight to voicemail. When I checked our online banking app, my heart dropped. Our joint savings account showed a balance of $17.32. Just yesterday, there had been $42,000, money we'd saved for a down payment on our dream house. I tried reaching him on Facebook, Instagram, even email blocked everywhere. It was as if he'd erased me from his digital life with the same cold calculation he'd used to empty our account. What James didn't realize was that this wasn't the first time I'd sensed something was wrong. For months, he'd been distant, taking mysterious business calls in the bathroom, password protecting his phone suddenly after years of transparency. I'd noticed the signs, but kept hoping I was just being paranoid. That morning, he'd kiss me goodbye like any other day, saying he'd pick up dinner on his way home from work. Now I wondered if he'd already packed his bags, if that kiss was actually his goodbye. The strange thing about betrayal is how quickly your mind shifts from shock to survival. While standing there in the break room, trembling and trying not to collapse, something inside me hardened. I remembered the emergency credit card I kept hidden in my work locker, the separate account my grandmother had advised me to maintain, just in case. And most importantly, the financial training I'd been secretly pursuing online for the past year. James thought he was leaving me broken, but in reality, he had no idea who I really was. Topic 2, the secret preparation. What my husband never understood about me was my capacity for quiet preparation. 6 months earlier, I'd noticed the first real red flag, a receipt for an expensive dinner at a restaurant we'd never been to together. Instead of confronting him immediately, I began watching and learning. I started by documenting every unusual behavior, every unexplained absence, and every financial discrepancy in a password-protected app on my phone. I wasn't just collecting evidence. I was preparing myself mentally for what I might discover. My grandmother had always told me, "A smart woman has her own safety net that nobody knows about." Following her advice, I'd opened a separate account at a different bank 3 years into our marriage. Each month, I deposited a small portion of my paycheck. Nothing that would raise suspicion, just enough to slowly build security. By the time James sent that text, I had managed to save nearly $36,000 that he knew nothing about. This wasn't about expecting the worst. It was about honoring my grandmother's wisdom about financial independence. During those months of suspicion, I also began building what I called my invisible strength training. I enrolled in free online financial management courses, joined women's support forums where others had survived similar situations, and reconnected with friends I'd lost touch with during my marriage. Each step was small enough to go unnoticed, but significant enough to build resilience. I even consulted with a legal advisor during my lunch breaks, asking hypothetical questions about marital assets and financial protection. The most powerful preparation, however, was purely psychological. I started visualizing myself as capable of handling any crisis, reminding myself of challenges I'd overcome before meeting James. I recalled putting myself through college while working 2 jobs, caring for my mother during her illness, and rebuilding after that apartment fire in my 20s. Each morning, I would look in the mirror and silently affirm, "Whatever happens, I am enough." James might have been planning his escape, but I was unconsciously preparing for my renaissance. The full extent of James's betrayal unfolded like a mystery novel, where I uncovered one clue after another. After that devastating text, I went home to find certain things missing: his favorite clothes, the expensive watch I'd given him for our anniversary, and oddly enough, our wedding album. What remained were drawers left half open, his collection of sports memorabilia, and bills he hadn't bothered to take. It felt like he'd performed a calculation of what was worth taking and what could be discarded, including me. What he couldn't have known was that I had access to our cell phone account. Though he'd blocked my calls and texts, he hadn't thought to remove me as an authorized user on our shared plan. That night, with shaking hands but resolute determination, I logged in and checked his call history. The same number appeared repeatedly, sometimes with calls lasting hours, often late at night when he'd told me he was working. I didn't need to be a detective to understand what this meant. The following morning, I took a personal day from work and began my own investigation. With access to our credit card statements, I uncovered regular charges at hotels just 20 minutes from our home. There were jewelry purchases that had never made their way to me, and restaurant bills for two at places we'd never visited together. Each discovery was like a knife, but each also strengthened my resolve. This wasn't just about money, it was about years of calculated deception. The most revealing discovery came from our shared cloud storage that James had forgotten about. While looking for important documents, I found photos, dozens of them, showing James with another woman. They weren't just recent photos. Some dated back almost 2 years. There they were, smiling on beaches we'd talked about visiting someday, celebrating holidays during times he'd told me he was on business trips. The timestamps told a story of a double life, so thoroughly maintained that I almost had to admire the dedication it required. Almost. The morning after discovering James's deception, I sat at our kitchen table with a notepad and began taking inventory of our financial situation. The joint account had been nearly emptied, but I knew there was more to our financial picture. We had investment accounts, retirement funds, and a small property James had inherited from his uncle. I needed to understand exactly what I was dealing with before deciding my next steps. This wasn't about revenge. This was about reclaiming what was rightfully mine. I contacted our bank and discovered something crucial. James had withdrawn the money in person just 30 minutes before sending me that text. The bank representative sounded sympathetic as she explained that since it was a joint account, either party could withdraw funds without the other's consent. However, she also mentioned something that made my breath catch. There had been a failed attempt to access our investment portfolio. James had tried to liquidate our investments, but couldn't complete the transaction without my signature on certain documents. What James didn't realize was that as a joint account holder, I still had complete access to transaction records and account activities. I could see exactly where the money had gone, transferred to a new account he had opened just 2 weeks earlier. I printed every record, every transaction, and began creating a detailed timeline of his financial movements over the past 6 months. Patterns emerged showing small transfers gradually moving money away, testing the waters before the final withdrawal. The most surprising discovery came when I checked our tax returns from the previous year. James had always handled our taxes, claiming he enjoyed dealing with numbers. Looking at them now with fresh eyes and newfound suspicion, I noticed discrepancies. He had underreported his income and hidden certain assets. This wasn't just a betrayal of our marriage. These were potentially illegal financial maneuvers that could have consequences beyond our divorce. I carefully documented everything, knowing that information would be my most powerful asset in what was coming next. After 3 days of shock, investigation, and planning, I decided it was time to respond, not with emotional outbursts, but with strategic precision. My first move was to secure what remained of our joint assets. I contacted our investment firm and placed a freeze on all transactions, explaining that there was a marital dispute in progress. Then I called our credit card companies to ensure no new charges could be made. Each call was difficult, requiring me to briefly explain my situation to strangers, but each completed task gave me back a small sense of control. Next, I consulted with 3 different divorce attorneys before selecting one who specialized in cases involving financial deception. During our first meeting, when I presented my organized documentation of James's activities, both financial and personal, she leaned back in her chair with a surprised smile. "Most clients come to me in pieces," she said. "You've already done half my job." She explained that my methodical approach to gathering evidence would significantly strengthen my position. We filed emergency orders to prevent further dissipation of assets. While legal proceedings began, I turned my attention to practical matters. I changed the locks on our home, which was primarily in my name, due to my better credit score when we purchased it, redirected our mail to a post office box, and systematically removed James's access to any shared online accounts. I wasn't acting out of spite. I was creating boundaries that should have existed long ago. Each action was taken with careful documentation and within legal guidelines my attorney had outlined. Perhaps the most satisfying moment came when I finally accessed my emergency account, the one my grandmother had inspired me to create. While James thought he had left me financially devastated, I transferred enough money to cover 3 months of expenses into my checking account. That night, I ordered takeout from my favorite restaurant, opened a bottle of wine I'd been saving for a special occasion, and allowed myself to really feel everything for the first time since that text. There were tears, yes, but underneath them was something unexpected. A growing sense of freedom and rediscovery of my own strength. 2 weeks after James's disappearance, while I was in the middle of reorganizing what was now just my home office, my phone rang with an unfamiliar number. Hesitantly, I answered. "Hello." The silence lasted just long enough for me to consider hanging up when I heard his voice. "I think we need to talk." James sounded different, smaller somehow, his usual confidence noticeably absent. Part of me wanted to hang up immediately, but curiosity won out. I simply responded, "I'm listening," and waited while the silence stretched between us. He started with what I assume he thought was a generous offer. He would allow me to keep the house if I agreed not to pursue any claims on his money or retirement accounts. When I didn't immediately respond with gratitude, his tone changed. "Look, I know you're upset, but this happens. People fall out of love. People move on." As he spoke, I pulled up the document my attorney had helped me prepare, detailing exactly how our assets should legally be divided. I listened to him outline his version of our financial separation, noting how conveniently it favored him in every aspect. When he finally paused for my response, I spoke calmly and clearly, my voice steadier than I expected. "James, I've filed for divorce on grounds of financial misconduct and adultery. I have documentation of the money you've hidden, the false tax returns you submitted in both our names, and extensive evidence of your relationship with." I paused before saying her name, the woman from the photos. The silence on his end was profound. Then came the shift from confidence to confusion, then quickly to anger. "You're bluffing," he said, but his voice had lost its certainty. I explained that my attorney would be contacting him directly, that all communication should go through proper legal channels from this point forward, and that I expected full financial disclosure in the proceedings. Before ending the call, I couldn't resist adding one final truth. "You know, James, when you sent that text, you thought you were ending something. You didn't realize you were actually setting me free." After hanging up, I sat in perfect stillness for several minutes, surprised by the lightness I felt. For the first time since this began, I smiled genuinely, not because I was happy about the situation, but because I recognized the woman I was becoming in response to it. The legal process that followed was both more complicated and more straightforward than I had anticipated. Complicated because divorce proceedings always involve untangling 2 intertwined lives, but straightforward because the evidence of James's financial misconduct was so well documented. My attorney filed motions for emergency relief, requesting that James return the improperly withdrawn funds and provide a complete accounting of all assets. The initial hearing was scheduled quickly, and I spent hours preparing myself both practically and emotionally for facing him in court. When the day arrived, I chose my outfit carefully, a navy blue dress that conveyed professionalism rather than victimhood. James appeared with his attorney, looking simultaneously defensive and shocked to see me so composed. Throughout the proceedings, I maintained eye contact with the judge rather than James, speaking clearly when asked questions and deferring to my attorney for legal points. What struck me most was how James seemed unable to look directly at me, as if seeing the consequence of his actions embodied was too difficult to face. The judge was particularly interested in the timeline I'd constructed, showing the systematic movement of funds and the attempt to access our investment accounts. When James's attorney tried to characterize the withdrawal as a reasonable action, given the breakdown of the marriage, the judge interrupted. The breakdown apparently only known to your client, counselor, as evidenced by the text message sent immediately after the withdrawal. It was a small moment, but it validated what I'd felt, that there's a profound difference between ending a relationship honestly and orchestrating an ambush. By the end of that first hearing, the judge ordered a freeze on all remaining assets, required James to provide a full financial disclosure within 10 days, and most significantly, ordered the return of 50% of the withdrawn funds to a court-monitored account pending final distribution. As we left the courtroom, James attempted to approach me, but my attorney smoothly stepped between us, reminding him that all communication should go through proper channels. Walking down those courthouse steps, I felt a curious blend of sadness for what had been lost and pride in how I was handling what came next. In the midst of legal proceedings and emotional processing, I began the work of reconstructing my life. First came practical matters, removing James's name from utility accounts, creating a realistic budget based on my income alone, and establishing new routines and spaces that held memories of our shared life. I repainted our bedroom a color I had always loved but James had vetoed, rearranged furniture to create better flow, and donated clothes he'd left behind to a local shelter. Each change, however small, represented a reclaiming of space and self. Financial reconstruction proved more challenging, but ultimately more rewarding. With guidance from a financial advisor recommended by my attorney, I created a comprehensive plan that acknowledged my current situation while building toward future security. I rolled over my portion of our retirement accounts into new investments, established an emergency fund separate from my existing savings, and even began a small portfolio focused on companies whose values aligned with my own. The woman who had once deferred financial decisions to her husband was now researching investment strategies during lunch breaks. The emotional reconstruction happened in less visible, but more profound ways. I joined a support group for people navigating divorce after betrayal, finding unexpected comfort in shared experiences and collective wisdom. I reconnected with friends who had drifted away during my marriage, some of whom admitted they had sensed something wasn't right with James, but hadn't known how to express their concerns. Most importantly, I began therapy with a counselor specializing in recovery from betrayal trauma, learning to process my grief without letting it define my future. Perhaps the most unexpected aspect of reconstruction was rediscovering parts of myself that had gradually been compromised during my marriage. I enrolled in a photography class I'd always been interested in, but had abandoned when James called it impractical. I spent evenings reading books that had gathered dust on my shelves, reconnecting with ideas and stories that had once inspired me. I even began writing again, something I hadn't done since college, filling journal pages with raw reflections that gradually evolved into insights and eventually into a newfound clarity about what I wanted from this next chapter of life. Life has a remarkable way of revealing strength you never knew you possessed. When my husband sent that text thinking he was delivering my greatest defeat, he was unwittingly setting the stage for my greatest comeback. The journey from that shocking moment to where I stand today wasn't easy or linear. There were days when grief felt overwhelming and nights when uncertainty kept me awake. But with each challenge faced and overcome, I discovered capabilities within myself that had always been there, waiting for the opportunity to emerge. What would you do if the foundation you thought was secure suddenly crumbled beneath you? How would you respond if someone who promised to stand beside you instead walked away with everything you'd built together? These aren't just hypothetical questions. They're invitations to consider your own preparedness, your own resilience, your own capacity for renewal. The truth is, We never fully know our strength until we're forced to use it. Today, my financial situation is not just recovered but improved. My emotional well-being, though tested, has deepened through authentic healing rather than avoidance. The legal proceedings eventually concluded with outcomes far more favorable than James initially proposed. A testament to preparation, documentation, and refusing to be intimidated. But the most valuable outcome wasn't measured in dollars or legal victories. It was the discovery that betrayal doesn't have to be the end of your story. Sometimes, it's just the beginning of a better one. If my story resonated with you, if you've experienced betrayal, or are simply working to build your own financial independence, I hope you'll continue this journey with me. Subscribe to this channel and activate notifications so you never miss our discussions about financial empowerment, emotional resilience, and rebuilding after setbacks. Share your own experiences in the comments below. Your story might be exactly what someone else needs to hear today. Remember, the same hands that can pick up broken pieces can also build something entirely new and unexpectedly beautiful.